I can remember years later, back now being a project manager, and we were working on a really big scheme that was just short of £20 million, and it was one of the sort of biggest contractors in the UK. And I got really close with their QS. And I remember talking to him about the bugbears that I found with being a QS and sort of why I left it behind. And I made this point about doing people's paperwork almost embarrassingly, because I kind of thought that this can't be normal. I remember him coming straight back to me saying, that happens all the time. And this was one of the sort of biggest contractors in the UK, saying that they have to do a lot of their subbies paperwork too, in terms of just breaking it down to absolute bullet points in terms of this is this is that, this is this. And that, like I said, it's not so much in terms of that you're happy to help people out in the beginning, but after that point, it kind of becomes like an expectation of the subby to actually, for you to do their paperwork. And you're like, no, like this is your business. You're the one profiteering from this. Like we gave you the chance to work on this project. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new to the channel, my name is James and this is Career Insights. In this video, I want to cover why after 6 years as a QS, I decided to call it a day and head into project management. Now this isn't to poo-poo on the QS role, far from it. I obviously work with QSs all the time. What the video is for is to try and give you a different take on the role of being a QS. And ultimately, it doesn't even really apply to being a QS. This is just some factors that ultimately being a QS was never going to work out for me. And it's probably some things that you should think about in any role that you're going into, and when you try and actually think what your personality is like. So in terms of the role itself, I actually loved it for probably about 18 months, 2 years. And then after that point, I basically hit like a steady decline of falling more and more out of love with the role. Now, just like anything in life, there wasn't particularly one reason as to why I fell out of love with it, but it was actually a few reasons that added up together, meant that after that 6-year period, there was just no way that I was going to continue on as a QS. Now, I've broken these reasons down to 4 main factors. The 4 main reasons are repetitiveness, emotional blackmail, the better you become doesn't actually mean the more rewards you get out of it, and also chasing paperwork and doing other people's paperwork. Now, I'll dive into these in a bit more detail as we go along, so let's jump into it. So number 1, repetitiveness. Now, if you'd have asked me when I was younger, and remember this is a very naive me when I'm younger, what would have been my worst job to do, I would have said something along the lines of a school teacher. Now, the reason for saying that is that I looked at a school teacher as being highly repetitive. So obviously you're teaching the same curriculum over and over and over again each year. And I wasn't really factoring in obviously the positive side of being a teacher, which is that you're helping children come along, and obviously you're going to build bonds with those children and feel kind of responsible for how much they've learned. But just focus on the aspect of like once a year being too repetitive and the same curriculum being repetitive. Ultimately, what I didn't factor in was that being a QS, that rolling repetitiveness is actually on like a 3 to 4 week cycle. Whereas going back to the teacher where I thought, oh, that's too much. That was once a year you repeat in the cycle. Being a QS, it's actually 3 documents you work on all the time. And that cycle is every month, which is valuations, payment certificates, and cash flows. Now, very broadly, I don't want to go into the actual documents themselves too much, but obviously a valuation is that you meet a subcontractor on site. You may walk the site, or you may just do it over emails in terms of that they apply for how much work that they've done in that month, and you essentially agree, disagree, or come to an agreement over that valuation being correct. Once you agree that the value is correct, you will then issue them a payment certificate to say that yes, this is correct, and you can raise an invoice against this payment certificate. So you're basically like a classification period. And then in that process for your company you're working for, or for your client, you'll then put together a cash flow to show how all the payments that are being made that month, and obviously you're tallying that up the whole way through the project. You'll also be agreeing variations, that type of aspect as you go along. Now, going back to what I said earlier about the repetitiveness of this, is that process every month probably takes somewhere between 7 to 10 days. Again, depends on the complexity of the project. But 7 to 10 days means that you're going through that process again, basically in the next 3 weeks. So you kind of like got a 7 to 10 day sprint where you're working really hard to get all that paperwork through, and then you've only got a rest of 3 weeks before it's coming again. Now, if you think about now doing that over 6 years, or you've got a multitude of projects. So when I was a QS, I didn't just have one project, I had a few projects. I never really got out of that cycle. You maybe have like a week off a month. So again, you think about it from a seniority perspective, the higher up you get as a QS and the more projects you've got on the go, the more you're going to be in that process all the time. So if you're doing one project, you've got maybe a 3 week gap before you're doing it again. If you're doing 2 or 3 projects, you maybe only have a week off before you're doing that. And it's not in terms of that those documents are particularly complex, but it's the mind-numbingness of it and it's the repetitiveness of it that used to absolutely do my head in. By the time I was coming to the end, say maybe into year 4 or 5, I absolutely dreaded that process. I kind of had anxiety about doing it. So that's really it. That's really the repetitive point in terms of the role is on a very short cycle in terms of how often you do it. So for an 18-month project, you've got 18 months of doing that. There are other aspects of the job. I'm not denying that there aren't, but that aspect of it is repetitive. It goes over and over and over, and it's a very short time frame, which ultimately did my head in. Number 2, emotional blackmail. Now, I've obviously described one major aspect of the role of being a QS. The other one is obviously getting prices in and awarding contracts to subcontractors. Now, obviously in that process, whilst other people will get involved in the pricing aspect, so you will have like meetings with the project managers or maybe senior members of staff coming along to the meetings, ultimately the negotiation aspect of it, the to and fro and entering the contract, is all going through you as a QS. That means that the relationship aspect of particularly the finances is all with you. Now, you can probably see where I'm going with this, is that means that when it comes to payday or the lead up to payday, subbies chase you continuously. Now, I've got no issues actually with subbies chasing you for money. That's just part and parcel of the role, and it's something you'll probably have to accept if you want to be a QS, that you're going to be chased on a regular basis. You may be sitting there thinking that accounts should be dealing with that, but like I said, the whole contract, the whole deal was done with you, therefore they see you as their point of contact, and a lot of subbies would rather chase you to put you under pressure, and then you'll chase accounts to get that information back to them. Now, to delve into this a bit more, obviously I said that it was as emotional blackmail. Now, what I mean by that is that you have to remember that the majority of subbies that are out there, say 80 to 90% of them, are actually very small subbies, ranging from say one-man bands, maybe up to 10 employees, and that there are very big subbies out there, but they're few and far between. You've got to remember that construction industry, or the subby industry in particular, is kind of built on tons of small companies. Now, to go into another layer on top of that is that what you have to remember is that a lot of subcontractors themselves are born out of other subcontractors. So you might have, say, a team of 10 plasterers. One of those plasterers decides to set up on their own and then become a plasterer subcontractor themselves and maybe bring along one other person. So now they're a 2-person company. Now, what goes on in the UK particularly is that subcontractors are still getting paid on a weekly basis. So that means when they start up on their own, they have got next to no cash flow behind them. So they're obviously tight for money. So money is hugely important in terms of getting paid, but also they're used to getting paid on this weekly basis. Now that means that they're basically desperate for money all the time. What that tends to mean is that they don't just chase for money when it's due, they kind of can chase for money for like 10 days to 2 weeks out, which becomes incredibly annoying because obviously you sign contracts to say this is the payment date, and then you're getting phone calls all the time about something that it's just not going to change. Like, accounts aren't going to release the money early, the client's not going to release the money early. That's the whole point of the contract, the whole point of the payment day. But that's still not the point of actually trying to make it. So leading into this topic, I obviously use the words emotional blackmail. Now, what I mean by this is that a lot of subbies, and I don't think they realise that obviously with you being the QS, you'll be dealing with, as I said earlier, something like 30 to 100 subbies on a job. And 10% of them will use like the same tactics and ring you up to say, oh, it's my kid's birthday at the weekend, I really, really need the money. Like, when do you think is there any chance of getting fast tracked? Is there any chance it's going to come in on time? And it won't just be kids. Honestly, I've heard way stronger things than that on emotional blackmail. But what I mean is that aspect of it, as if like putting the guilt trip on you, is something that after a while, and when there's more than one subby doing it, and you're taking, say, 2 or 3 phone calls per week of emotional blackmail, it kind of does your head in. And I can remember after only doing the role for maybe 2 years, that when I would have like pre-start meetings or I was about to award the contract, I would actually say to the subcontractors that I have no qualms with you chasing money, that's absolutely fine, that's part and parcel of the job. But if you use emotional blackmail, there's a 50% chance I'm going to put the phone down on you. Now, that sounds so harsh, but it was basically me trying to say to people, look, you all do it, it gets really boring, and ultimately it's not fair on me or any of the team and the QSs for you to start bringing in struggles, say, at home, that probably 99% of the time aren't true. It's just another trigger to try and put pressure under you, to try and put pressure on you to get that money early. So again, I found that incredibly draining, that people just use the same tactics, and like I said, they don't realise, they just see, obviously it's just them, they might be getting success, I don't know, somewhere else by using that tactic, but it becomes incredibly draining listening to that over and over again. So that's that point in a nutshell. Number 3, the better you become isn't always rewarding. So in my role as a QS, I worked for a relatively small company, so we kind of did contracts anywhere from say 1 million to about 6 million was probably our biggest in that company. Now, as part of the role, I didn't just do the QS aspects that I was saying earlier in terms of finding subcontractors and doing the valuations. I would also take part in the estimating for the companies, which is kind of the bidding aspect of projects. So what happens with bidding is obviously a lot of the time you're using existing data to bid on future projects. But what I would say is that very, very broadly, poor estimators do that, and good estimators start to learn about the logistics. How would you actually go about building it? So you would spend a lot more time with, say, project managers or construction managers learning about the sequence of events, because obviously there's a very big danger if you're only taking prices from historical projects and putting them on new projects that you just haven't factored things in. So to give you a really simple example, let's say you've got a site that you've taken the historical data on that is a very spacious site, it's a 200-acre site, you're the only person building there. That site needed a crane, and then you go and copy and paste the price that you paid for the crane on this site across to the other site and don't factor in anything else. Now the other site, the site you're bidding on, may be in London for instance, and it's incredibly tight. Now when you put a crane in London, you're going to need obviously permits, you might need parking suspensions, you're probably going to need party wall spares, you've obviously got an oversale license. So there's a whole host of things that are going to cost realistically in the tens of thousands, and you're probably going to have a small window in which you can actually work in, because you're going to need to seek all those different permissions. Now, like I said at the beginning, a poor QS or a poor estimator is going to miss all of those things, and I can't tell you how common it is for people just to miss glaringly obvious information from one project to another project where they just haven't given the new project any emphasis. They might not even visited site, or they did for half an hour, and just haven't sort of used common sense across one site to another. Now, to give you a real example of this, many moons ago, we bid on a project, we came second. The client at the time said, guys, I really want to work with you over this other contractor that don't install a lot of faith. Is there anything you can do with your price? And we basically got to the crux of, there was quite a big difference between our two prices, and I just said, look, there's no way in hell that they can do it for that price. I'm happy to look at their price, run through it, and come back to you if there's any anomalies, or to look at it from our perspective that maybe our subcontractors have come back with too bigger figures and there's something glaringly wrong on our side of it. To cut a very long story short, they had missed so many obvious things, like it didn't include any windows. So the site was all new windows and they just hadn't priced it in at all. And what I did to help the client out is that I inputted our costs for the items that they'd missed onto theirs, and basically showed, I think we were there or thereabouts, we were within maybe 20 grand of each other on a very roughly about £1.2 million job. So very similar prices across two jobs, but ultimately we didn't actually win the contract. He signed the contract with that company. Obviously we were never involved, but I can guarantee you what happens is that they go through this whole argument phase through the contract where the client argues, well, it was on the drawings, it's in the contract, and the contractor's saying back, well, I hadn't priced for it, it's not there. And it's just this whole argument that goes on. Now, going back to the overall point of what I made in this role is that ultimately you don't want to be going through that turmoil during the contract where you've just missed things. I can remember ex-girlfriend at the time saying to me that I never got excited when we won projects, and I used to say to her, yeah, because sometimes when you win projects you're more paranoid about what you could have missed than actually about winning it. So you kind of had this thing where it's like, yes, we've won a project, that's really good, particularly like during the last recession. That's obviously when I was a QS during that recession. You would be kind of excited that you won a project, but you'd also be a little bit worried in terms of had you missed anything, because ultimately the success kind of sat on your shoulders. So that's really it in a nutshell, is that going back to my overriding point that actually the better you get doesn't actually mean you're more successful, is that you can get better and better at being an estimator and starting to think about the logistics, think about how one site is different, think about how you build it. But ultimately you can get penalised by not winning contracts because you look more expensive, but ultimately you've thought about something and thought about how it would actually get built, and you've got a realistic price, and someone could have essentially been an idiot and missed glaringly obvious information, but they go and win the project. And probably, I'm not saying that this is a guide, but probably 8 out of 10 times they probably fought with the client to actually get the money back for it, which you had in the first place. So it's kind of frustrating that you do get better, You become more qualified, you become more senior in your role, but ultimately it doesn't always reward your company. So finally is doing other people's paperwork. Now this might seem absolutely bonkers, and for a long time I thought it was bonkers. So going back to the thing I said earlier, which is that I worked for a relatively small company, and I've also made the point that you get a lot of really small subcontractors. So using that example I gave earlier, where a one-man band or a two-man band have decided to set up the new company, and you're gonna give them their first tryout in terms of here's your first project. You've come in more competitive because you're a very lean machine and able to undercut a big contractor, which ultimately you as the main contractor should be able to make more money or more profit for your business. Now the glare in the obvious is going to happen, which is that yes, they know how to be a good subcontractor, they know how to do the work very well, so using plastering or carpentry or any of them, they know how to do that job very, very well. But what they have no experience of is actually doing their paperwork. And what I can tell you is that a lot of the time, again, I'll probably say 70-80% of the time, they're absolutely dreadful at their paperwork, particularly when they're first starting out and they haven't got a clue. So going back to the process before when you're doing the valuations, is that you'll go through the valuation with them on site. You think that, okay, right, that's agreed. And you've obviously got so many coming back to you with valuations on a daily basis. So you agree the valuation, they email it back, say the following day. But you might take a couple of days to actually look at that valuation because you've just got such a workload you've got to get through in that 7 to 10 day period to get everything back out again. So a couple of days go past, you look at it and go, this does not resemble anything we spoke about on site. So you give them a call, you say to them, hold up, like this doesn't resemble what we spoke about on site at all. And they say, oh yeah, okay. Right, yeah, what you're saying is right. I've obviously made a mistake on the paperwork. Let me go away and come back. Now, obviously, they're on your radar now that you're actually looking out for that paperwork, because now in that 7th day process, they've eaten up 5 days with doing something wrong. So it comes back, say, on the 6th day, and maybe it comes through in the evening, and now on your phone reading it going, nope, this is still really, really wrong. Like they haven't got a clue what they're doing. And then you basically get to the 7th day, you ring it again saying, you're getting this completely wrong. Like, I'm not trying to be mean, but do you actually understand what we're talking about? And this conversation has happened so many times where it's like, I don't really get it. Like, I'm really good at carpentry, they kind of focus on the positives, but I just haven't got a clue with paperwork. Could you just send me an email breaking down exactly what you expected to say? And that means that basically you start doing their paperwork for them. And the frustrations with that is that you're not getting paid to do their paperwork for them. I know earlier I said, as the company, you could be getting like more profit from them doing it. Like you could be getting more profit because they're a cheaper alternative or the cheapest tender that came in. But it's still so frustrating when ultimately they don't really care in the beginning to actually even learn how to do the paperwork. They just want to sort of resort back to being an employee like they were for a subcontractor, because ultimately if they can fob the paperwork off onto you and they just do a copy and paste themselves. And for a long time, because it was a small company, I thought that this was kind of just unique to maybe small businesses that are using like 1 and 2 man bands. But I can remember years later, back now being a project manager, and we were working on a really big scheme that was just short of £20 million, and it was one of the sort of biggest contractors in the UK. And I got really close with their QS. And I remember talking to him about the bugbears that I found with being a QS and sort of why I left it behind. And I made this point about doing people's paperwork almost embarrassingly, because I kind of thought that this can't be normal. I remember him coming straight back to me saying, that happens all the time. And this was one of the sort of biggest contractors in the UK, saying that they have to do a lot of their subbies paperwork too, in terms of just breaking it down to absolute bullet points in terms of this is this, this is that, this is this. And that, like I said, it's not so much in terms of that you're happy to help people out in the beginning, but after that point, it kind of becomes like an expectation of the subby to actually, for you to do their paperwork. And you're like, no, like this is your business, you're the one profiteering from this. Like we gave you the chance to work on this project. And yeah, it just kind of like does your head in, particularly like I said before, the time frame is like getting closer and closer and closer. You've got this window where you need to get through as much paperwork as possible so you can get the payment run out, because trust me, when people don't get paid on time, like they are in your ear. But like I said, that's part and parcel of the job. This is actually focusing on the aspect of people kind of expecting you to do their paperwork, which is just not on. So there you have it. Those are some of the gripes that I had as being a QS, and things that after a while, like they just build up, and the thought of doing any of them just is too much and you kind of need a time out from it. So that's why I made the jump from being a QS into being a project manager, because those things just kind of get on top of you. Like I always have this analogy about like arguments that you can have, or like things can get on your nerves. So I kind of say that you kind of start off on a motorway, which is that the motorway, like using like the M25, and people in the UK will understand this euphemism, maybe people outside the UK won't understand it, but it's the M25 is a big motorway ring road. So it takes about, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours to get round it in one go. So it's a big roundabout, big loop. Now I kind of look at arguments or gripes like that, which is that in the beginning a gripe may only actually happen like maybe once a year or once every 2 years. But after a while, when things start to eat up at you, you end up on this like mini roundabout where these little things that trigger you off all the time. And that's kind of what these points I've said today are, is that they happen so quick that I end up on that mini roundabout probably after like 4 or 5 years. And like at that year 6 point, I was like, no, like I'm out, I can't do this anymore. So hopefully you got some value from the video. Like I said, this isn't to poo-poo on QSs. I think it's a great job. These are just some of the things that, from a personality perspective, I was kind of never suited to be a QS. And it's something that I think a lot of you should give consideration to, because obviously a lot of roles have this differentiation between actually being very repetitive in repetitive tasks. And a lot of people are really well suited and really enjoy those roles. And other people like me like to be working on new stuff all the time, or that they're not, it hasn't got that repetitive nature because it's quite a big cycle, anywhere from say 1 year to 3 years before it happens again. Well, going back to project management, like another thing I like about it is that you're working on more than one project at a time. So it's just that constant interaction and change that my mind likes. So definitely think about other roles in that context. Is it something that's repetitive? Is it something that's actually drawn out? And actually, what are you like day to day? What are you like in school or uni? Those types of things, because I think it's a really good point in terms of what roles are actually like and how repetitive they are. So hopefully you got some value from the video. I've really enjoyed making this one. If you could smash the thumbs up button, honestly, it really helps. I've actually started to look more and more into this YouTube algorithm as to how to get better, and it massively helps out the channel. So guys, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.